Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sheffield DocFest. I am Cynthia Gilles, director of the festival, and I hope you enjoyed the film because we have on this New World Q&A, we have the filmmakers, and so it's Betsy West, we have Julie Cohen and Cinque Northern, who is co-writer and editor of the film. And I just want to thank you very much, first for the film, and second for being with us here. We are not just in Sheffield, we are also online, but also in 16 cinemas across the UK. So I wish we could be in the cinema, but I wish we could be in the 16 cities. And well, we are here together. So thank you very much for being here and welcome.
Thank you. We're thrilled.
I wanted to start by first saying that it was really a joy for us to invite My Name is Pauli Murrays for the program. It's such an important film and such a timely film, but also that kind of puts history on a place that we didn't know about and brings justice for our conceptions of history and the narratives that we usually got to know. And I wanted to say that, not only Pauli Murrays is deeply inspiring as a person, as a figure, but also the way you have worked so thoroughly through archives, through a very detailed editing, and really putting a story together where we get to access so many different dimensions of their life that it's so inspiring. And so I wanted to start by asking you about the transition between your previous film, RBJ, about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and this film. And I know you found Pauli Murrays on that process. And so just if you could share with us that moment when you discovered this person and the moment you decided a film had to be made.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, Cynthia, Julie and I were directing the film RBG about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and we learned then that Justice Ginsburg, as a lawyer fighting for women's rights in the 1970s, had read a groundbreaking legal essay that Pauli Murrays wrote about using our 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to help women secure equal rights. And so we took note of that and kind of put it aside while we were finishing the film. Afterward, started looking into Pauli Murrays and were immediately just blown away by the expanse of Pauli's life, all, the civil rights activism, influence on Thurgood Marshall, educator, priest, incredible writer. And, the question that we asked ourselves, I kind of remember Julie calling me, and Julie had found some audio tapes online. I remember Julie calling me and saying, this person is so extraordinary. Why don't we know more about her? And someone should make a film.
You say, Cynthia, what was the moment? But really, I think it was more a series of moments, because at first, learning about Pauli Murrays through Justice Ginsburg made us think like, wow, what an amazing person and figure in the legal and activist and educational and clergy movements. Why don't we know more about Pauli? But, Pauli died 35 years prior. So could you really, I don't think the idea of like making a film popped to us immediately. It was more as we were sort of talking about how much people had been hungry to hear elements of RBG's story that they hadn't known, and thinking like, wow, it'd be great to do something more with Pauli Murrays, but is there really enough material? When we found that audio tape, it was like, oh, well, maybe we could do something. Maybe we could do like a short film. And then when we really, the two of us and our producer, Talaya Bridges McMahon, like when we really started digging into the archive, like the more material that emerged, the more I was like, wait a second, they're actually Pauli, so presciently had left behind the materials that could tell this whole story as a feature film.
And actually, one of the one of the most interesting details I found in your film is the fact that not only Pauli had all these roles during her life, but she was also an incredible archivist of her own life. And that is quite beautiful when we have this moment when we're talking to a younger niece, and she's talking about discovering this archive and the way she organized her life through documents. And I felt that is kind of giving the impression and the dimension of urgency that she had in her life about what she was doing. Did you find this dimension of urgency in the way she was organizing her papers, her materials, her documents? Did you find that she wanted this film to be made? Did you feel that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was no accident. Pauli, who had a difficult life, moved from place to place, never had many resources, and yet managed to save, over 135 boxes worth of material. I mean, that's a deliberate act of someone who might have been not as recognized in a lifetime, but who knew that people would respond to this material, that Pauli's life had meaning beyond Pauli's life and would resonate with later generations. That was pretty moving to discover all of that and to know that it had been left pretty deliberately.
Another question that I found really interesting, and this has to do also with the editing of the film and it's, how you put it together, is the fact that it has been written, and it is true that Pauli Murray was talking about intersectionality ahead of, we were talking about intersectionality ahead of time. The way she connected women's rights with racial justice, with civil rights movements, with spirituality, with so many dimensions, right? And what I found interesting in your film, and sometimes surprising, was the way you were giving an equal space to each dimension of her life and each question. So her involvement in a union struggle had the same dignity as her gender fluidity questions, as more private questions, her poetry. And I found that as a filmic choice, as an artistic choice, really powerful, also politically powerful. So I wanted to ask Cinque, but also you both, Betsy and Julie, how did you discuss this? How was the process of actually figuring out, well, it's all equally important. We cannot really just extract one thing, or how was this process?
Well, first of all, there's a lot. There's so much of Pauli Murray. There's so much in the archives. There's so much of Pauli Murray's life. There's so many stories that are not in this film. So the first choice is what would actually be in here, what would represent Pauli Murray. But I feel like, I don't know if we had an official conversation, but I think we all instinctively knew that these things informed each other, that Pauli Murray's poetry, Pauli Murray's personal life and sense of, Pauli Murray was facing such unique boundaries. It seemed like every part of, Pauli's life had a boundary because of who Pauli actually was. And so I think it's to not show that doesn't give a full picture of why Pauli would fight against, these arbitrary boundaries, legal boundaries. It kind of, I think all of these different elements of that one life kind of correlate. And sorry about that. We're in New York. I think all of these different things inform each other.
Then the other question that I found really strong in the film is, I was thinking about for example, James Baldwin, who comes from from his connection to the church, leaves the church, becomes a writer, and goes into a more political and activist way of living. And Pauli she never really left activism, right? But she comes from a proper political work as a lawyer, and then becomes an evangelical priest, right? And a pioneer on that also. And I was thinking how important in your film, it's so clear how both notions of law and state of law and spirituality need to walk together. They walk together when we talk about how to live together and how to walk towards a fairer society and an equality among everyone, right? And so I wanted to hear you a little bit about that, because we are living in a time when, injustices and blunt injustices have been called out and need to be called out, and things need to change. And suddenly I was looking at the film and finding deeply inspiring for today how these two dimension of law, of trust in law, and at the same time some dimension of trust in community and trust in the possibility of a spiritual community kind of feed each other and can strengthen each other.
Yeah, I think Pauli would say, not to go back into history, to put words into the mouth of a great figure like Pauli Murray, but I think from so much writing, we know that Pauli would say, you cannot separate out my legal thinking slice from my fighting for justice slice, from spirituality and searching communion with a higher force and with my fellow human beings. Like, it's all part, I mean, integrating so many different strands was like Pauli's whole style. It's part of, related to your last question, it's part of what made the putting together of the film such a huge challenge for all of us. I mean, I think one great thing Cinque often brought to the process is we had so many different scenes that were about so many different things, and on a micro basis saying, like, wait a second, how does this moment in Pauli's development, how does that stem from the last one we showed again? Because there's like just so much going on here, and sort of trying to hone in on making one scene feel like it flowed into the next was probably the biggest challenge of the film. But there were lots of challenges, but that felt like a big challenge.
You know, I want to say that I have such a clear memory, and you probably do too, the two of you, of watching the scene that Cinque cut of the poem that Pauli writes that we use after the section about lynching, Crush Me. And, you know, it just kind of elevated what was happening to Pauli in Pauli's life to how Pauli wrote about it in the beautiful poetry. I think at the beginning, we didn't really intend to rely so heavily on poetry in the film, but we found that for some of those transitions, it would be, we were going like, oh, does Pauli have a poem about this? And then we like madly going through Pauli's beautiful Dark Testament and looking for poems that help make the connection.
Absolutely, and it's really beautiful to see how her poems in the film are constantly responding to those urgencies, right? I wanted to ask you, because in the film we see like the ACLU lawyer who has done an amazing work in later times, this very young lawyer talking about Pauli Murray's legacy. We see trans activists talking about her legacy. It's so enormous, the impact of her work today. But at the same time, I mean, I can imagine that you were not the only people who hadn't heard about her, right? It's a story that is coming out now. So I wanted to ask you, what is the impact? Not that the impact that the film is having, but what is the impact that you would love the film to have in terms of long-term transformation in the way we address history, in the way we address people's dedication to causes, but also in the way we speak to each other and we think as a community.
I know I had a personal one is that I wanted, there's so many facets of Pauli Murray's life, and there's so much personal information, and Pauli Murray is really vulnerable in this film. And I always wanted someone to see themselves in it and kind of know they're not alone, particularly around Pauli Murray's, struggles with gender identity, but really all of it. There's so much, I had never seen these kinds of struggles depicted in a film from that era, and sort of know that these things were going on before there was a language for it, before there were names for it. I feel like there's so many lessons you could pull from Pauli Murray's life. So I always wanted people to take it like it's just a buffet of, ways to frame things and ways to frame reality and how to be who you truly are. So I was always excited about someone who never knew who Pauli Murray was being able to see themselves in Pauli Murray and to take that and then use it today.
I think I would love people to come away from the film not only having learned about Pauli Murray's story and being kind of connected and enlightened to everything that Pauli did in life, but also thinking like, hey, I wonder what else is too narrow about what I've learned about history through my whole life. Like, what are the other horizons that still try to expand, which is why I think in the film, we have a number of putting things into context of the times, some of which are very familiar historical events, such as the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., but others, including the Detroit riots of 1943 and, that aren't part of the history lesson that you learned in school. And yet, or the fact that Pauli Murray, when with a friend, Pauli got arrested for sitting in the front of a bus, long before the historical figure Rosa Parks that we're all familiar with. But on consideration, obviously there were all kinds of acts of standing up against unjust laws going back decades before the ones we've known about.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that, and I think it is a reconsideration of history. I'm really hoping that people will find an inspiration in Pauli's story and a joyousness to Pauli's story. I mean, Pauli was not a victim. Pauli had so many challenges, so many difficult moments in life to face, and yet Pauli always found a way, always went around, and often found a way that not only helped Pauli, but actually helped everybody else coming behind Pauli. I find it, a joyous story, and I hope that people will enjoy learning about Pauli. It's not just, oh, you should learn this history. It's like, wow, this history, this person is so interesting. I want to learn about it.
Absolutely. And what you said, Betsy, about not being a victim, I think is really key to your film. How you present this person as a person who had to build the way to empower herself and to actually stand for herself and for the others. And it's quite incredible, as Cinque was saying, the questions that came before we had words for them. I mean, when she's trying to contact doctors about her gender question, and she's trying to explain something that was completely out of the horizon and the landscape of what was being popularly talked about, and even in medicine, it's quite incredible that someone had the capacity to articulate and to identify and to keep that as an ongoing movement within their own personality and identity. So I find that the film not only speaks to questions of questions that are today absolutely urgent, like civil rights and fairness, but also to questions of identity building and how one can find ways of building identity despite so many challenges. I just wanted to ask a final question, which is a little bit of a provocation. How much do you think Jane Crow is not there anymore? How much do you think, if we go back to, because when I was looking at the film, some of the things seem so much still there. So many Pauli Murrays are needed today, right? So how much do you think is still there from what she was talking about? And it's very interesting because there is a moment when there is this kind of clash of word using between Pauli and the younger generation, between the use of words and the self-representation of Black people. And I was thinking, yeah, that changed, but how has change occurred in the US in this case until now?
Big question.
Well, that's a big question. That's a very big question. I mean, obviously, Pauli Murray changed along with other women, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, others changed the laws and some of the acceptable practices. But, we've just recently had the Me Too movement, which has opened people's eyes to the extent to which women were still being preyed upon and discriminated against. And of course, in our country, there is a push-pull on the LGBTQ rights movement. And on the one hand, we make advances. And on the other hand, we have a number of states that are considering discriminatory laws. So it's a, step forward, a couple steps back. It's an ongoing struggle.
Not to mention Black Lives Matter allowing for more open discussions of issues of racial injustice, and yet being nowhere near a solution or a cure.
Yeah.
And I think both things can exist simultaneously because, what the civil rights movement accomplished, like I literally wouldn't be riding on the backs, like in the front of a bus if they hadn't died, if so many people, part of the civil rights movement, hadn't died and gave up their lives in more ways than one. So I think we both simultaneously have come a long way, and at the same time have a long way to go on some issues. But we can't deny what people like Pauli Murray and other activists have accomplished.
Absolutely. And most of all, be inspired by them, right? And try to renovate their energy, and how we can do that today. Well, I think films like RBG and like My Name is Pauli Murray are really helping the struggle and the way that we all need to do. And it's not just in the US, of course, it's everywhere in the Western world, in a colonizing world. It's how it is, but the fact that these films are being made and having a big impact, that are being seen by a lot of people, it's something that really is important and really helps change. At least we believe that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Thank you so much, Betsy, Julie, and Cinque, for being here, and most of all for doing this film. And I hope I'll be here for your next film, talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully next film we can all be over in the UK in a cinema.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
And thank you for being with us.
Bye.
Thank you.